Hey, good morning, everyone. Adam here, and I'm here with our esteemed colleague and friend, Richard Chamberlain. Richard, as many of you know, is with a Legacy Law Group. They're next door, and they do estate planning. And Richard and I were having a conversation the other day, and I just thought, you know what, this is a conversation that we should probably let you in on. In other words, I think this could be valuable if someone hasn't done estate planning ever. Perhaps they haven't done it lately, or perhaps they have done it and might want a refresher as to what it means to plan an estate, to use a trust, or to consider the trust as a tool. Richard and I decided to just hit record and send this out to you. So we're going to do this in a way where, Richard has some slides prepared if we need them, but we just wanted to have a conversation with you in the room. So Richard, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks, Adam. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to share the information.
Thank you. And so we do retirement planning, and for most people, that means they want to get the question answered, can we retire? When can we retire? How much will we have? Will our money run out? All of that sort of thing. Kind of a secondary dimension to that, if you will, is to protect what they have so that they can remain retired. And then ultimately, because sadly we all do pass away, we want to make sure that their assets are protected and that their beneficiaries are protected from assets, which may sound strange, but I guess you'll tell us more about that. But kind of give us a sense, Richard, for like what is estate planning? What does it mean to use a trust? And let's walk through kind of how this might work.
Sure, sure. So estate planning is essentially the process of putting together a plan for the management of your assets. Now, a lot of people think when I die, but it's really what happens to your assets while you're living and what happens to your assets after you die. A good comprehensive estate plan is going to cover your a period of you being alive and well. Who's managing your assets at that point? If you're alive but incapacitated, who's managing your assets at that point, and what are they doing with them? When you pass away, who's managing your assets with that point? Who's receiving them, and how are they receiving them? So that's really what estate planning is putting together a written plan, and that is usually done in a series of documents, or not a series, several documents, a trust, a will, powers of attorney for healthcare, powers of attorney for financial and general matters. So we put all of those tools together as needed to help people put together that plan for the now and for the later.
Yeah, I think that it's easy to get uh, to be misled as I sometimes am, that it's not a death plan.
Right.
It's a living plan that also would provide protections and some tools for people at your death, but there's more to it than that. So that's a good clarifier.
Yeah. Yeah.
What often happens is I think people think that they have to be really wealthy to consider a trust. Now, just full disclosure, my wife and I have a trust, but we have a trust because we have still have some minor children, and that is a helpful thing in the event that we would pass away, that there would be protections and instructions for them. And again, a lot of our folks that we work with are retiring or have retired, so maybe trusts are helpful for them as well. Sorry, there's a car honking outside my window. Hopefully, it's not mine. Anyway, please continue.
Okay. Um, yeah, so there are a lot of reasons why people will do a trust. Absolutely. If somebody has what we would consider a high net worth, and in the estate planning world, that's under current law, $30 million plus, you need something comprehensive. But honestly, I don't know anybody who has that level of wealth. So there are a lot of non super high net worth reasons why people do trusts, and it really has to do with people. And putting plans in place that will make things easier for your family, preserving privacy, providing those protections that you mentioned when those are needed. So there's a host of reasons, probably three main reasons why people will do trusts, and none of them are because they're super wealthy.
Hmm. So talk about some of those reasons. What are those three main reasons that you
Sure.
mentioned?
You want to go to the slides at this point?
Sure, sure.
All right. Let's yeah, so let's jump to you should be seeing my why do people use living trusts at this point.
Sure.
Um, so, I guess first thing we need to talk about is what is a trust? And it's basically a tool. It's a written document that creates an entity that can own assets, and it operates at those three stages that we talked about. While somebody is alive and well, they're alive but incapacitated, and after they've died. And trust makers are the people who make the trust. There are trustees in a trust, and they're the people who are in charge of managing the assets that are owned by the trust. Initially, the trust makers are the trustees, but there are successor trustees who step in and become the trustee if the trust maker is incapacitated or when the trust maker passes away. And then, of course, there's the beneficiaries in the trust. That's the people that the trust is for the benefit of. So I think it's important to have that background because, if we just dive in talking about, well, why people do trusts and people don't know what a trust is and some of this terminology that we're using, it's not going to be as helpful. So, I think it's maybe important to talk about the background a little bit. But
Sure.
to get to the answer to your question, why do people do trusts? So my three main reasons that when people come to see me, these are the reasons that they have for doing a trust. Number one, they want to plan for their incapacity. And I'm going to go into more detail on each one of these in later slides. So planning for incapacity, avoiding probate, and customizing the distributions for their beneficiaries. So if you'll notice, none of those are, saving estate taxes, or we've got millions and millions of dollars. Certainly, if you do, trusts become more beneficial, but these are the kind of the core reasons why trusts are used and why they're so important.
So yeah, planning for incapacity, that's one that a lot of us don't want to think about. So in other words, if I can't manage my own affairs, then what happens? Probate, I'm guessing you're going to tell us more about that because it's a term we throw around, but I think it's not all that well understood. Customized distributions of beneficiaries, that to me is most of us think in terms of that. Like, okay, who gets what percentage, what
Mhm.
age, how does that work? But yeah, if you could kind of walk through some of these in more detail, I think that would be helpful because I think that uh, there's a view that this is just about passing your stuff on. But
Right,
the living benefits are really interesting to me.
right, right.
Yeah.
So on the planning for incapacity part, so that really triggers when someone becomes unable to manage their own property and finances. It could be they have dementia, it could be they have Alzheimer's. They just become um, sometimes people become uninterested in doing it anymore. So that's not really incapacity, but that does happen where you have older parents and they're saying the kids are taking over the finances and they want them to, but generally we're talking about we're not able to. So we have that incapacity situation. So if you run into that situation, you want to make sure that the right people are going to be managing your assets for you. Without a good written plan, that's going to require somebody to go to probate court and be appointed guardian for that individual, and then that guardian will manage the finances under court supervision. with the kind of the rules that the court sets and all of the hassle that comes with that. So that's another, it's a probate court situation. With a trust, on the other hand, you have that successor trustee that I mentioned who steps in, becomes the trustee. So if the trust maker, who's also the initial trustee, isn't capable of managing their own finances, then the successor trustee, and that's usually, one of the adult kids, if that's appropriate, could be other family members. They start managing the assets at that point for the benefit of the trust maker, making sure that their bills are being paid, making sure that their needs are being met. So they're using the assets in the trust to provide for the needs of the incapacitated trust maker. So it's a way to keep that incapacity asset management, keep it private, make sure the right people are doing it. And you can even put instructions in your trust for how things are going to be managed. Who can the assets in the trust be used for? For me, if I'm incapacitated, my spouse, my children, anybody who's dependent on me, with instructions for, it's okay to pay for these things or for these things. So we can get really specific if we need to on not only who's doing it, but what are they doing and for whom.
Okay,
So
so
that's
basically, you're picking your team, your care team, and then the trust gives them instructions and rights to manage your assets um, in a way that you've defined before there's a need arises. So it just kind of formalizes that team and gives them instructions.
absolutely very,
Okay.
yeah. I like your I like your summary of it. That's really good. So the next one is avoiding probate. And, 99 out of 100 people who come into my office, we send out a questionnaire to people when they're going to come in, and we say, what are you concerned about? What are you looking to do? Almost all of them have avoid probate as one of their goals. And a living trust will do that. But the reasons why, some people, they hear, or I should have my estate avoid probate. I'm not really sure why. Well, probate is a public process. It's through the county court system. Everything that gets filed in there is a public record. So anybody can see the information that's in a probate estate file anytime they want. And the information that's in there is the information all about the beneficiaries. Who are the family members of
Mm,
this individual who passed away? Who are the beneficiaries named in their will? What are their assets? What are the value of their assets? What bills did they have? Who received what from the estate? So all of that becomes public record. And with a trust, by avoiding probate, we keep all of that information private. It's nobody's business how much a person gives to their son, or if they did an equal distribution between their children, or if they left something to a charity or not. It's nobody's business. And so having a living trust keeps that information private
mm.
as opposed to public through probate.
Yeah, we're in a world now where we're all concerned about our information being taken advantage of, and this when you die, that all of your assets could be exposed to public information in that way. So this is one way to kind of protect that and protect those who are receiving assets because you don't want them to be targeted.
Exactly.
Mm,
Exactly. Yeah, we kind of look at that as, subjecting them to predators, who can take advantage of the people who are grieving and are receiving sums of money, sometimes a windfall, and they can be taken advantage of.
mm. Okay.
The other thing about probate, or another thing, the next thing is probate's a complicated process. It takes a long time. There are a lot of hoops that state law makes us jump through forms that have to be filed. People have to receive notices and sign waivers of notice, and things have to be submitted to the court. And we have to, open the estate, and then we have to provide a detailed inventory of the assets with valuations and appraisals. Um, and then at the end, we have to file an accounting with the court. So there's a very regimented, rigid system of you have to do this and you have to do that, and then you have to do this and then you have to do that. So it's a pain, to be
Mm.
honest. I mean, not to get too technical, but
Yeah.
it's a complicated process. So by having a trust and avoiding probate, you're making the administration easier for your loved ones. Now, there are still things that have to be done when a trust is administered, but it is done uh, in a much less rigid way.
You're kind of doing your
Information.
pre-work. You're doing your pre-work now rather than other people having to do it after you pass. And what we have found on our end is estates that have trusts are generally done much faster than estates that don't.
Yes,
And it's funny because people will say, "Well, I don't want to be a burden on my kids," and I think that's a lovely thing. And then I have to remind them, like, your kids were a pretty huge burden on you for a long time. But that said, doing this process in a formal way, like you're talking about with a trust, can really reduce that burden on them at a time when really they don't want to have to deal with any of that.
exactly, exactly. We find that a lot of people tell us that they can't start the grieving process until the estate has been settled and closed.
Wow, that's fascinating. Wow.
And
Hmm.
and and if that's taking minimum 6 months up to a year or more before they can really start to heal, then that's a concern.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So I like this next point, reducing expenses. Everybody likes
right.
that.
Yeah, we're we're big on keeping the expenses down. We want to make sure that as much as possible of what you've accumulated over your lifetime goes to the people that you want to benefit from it. And so by reducing the administration expenses, we're able to cut a significant amount of cost out of the administration of the estate. So probate is an expensive process. All of the local county courts have a schedule of attorney fees, and that's going to be the main expense for a probate estate. Lucas County starts out at 4.5% of the value of the assets in the estate, and it's graduated down from there. But the first $100,000 will cost the estate $4,500, and it just keeps accumulating from there.
Hmm.
Um, Wood County has a similar attorney fee for probate estates. It's a little bit lower on the smaller end, $3,875, I think, is the first $100,000. And then it's 3% of anything above that. So as the estate size grows, and we're looking at the value of the house and any bank accounts, investments, really anything that's going through probate, that's going to be included in that probate cost. So by having a trust and by having the assets in the trust avoid probate, we're minimizing that expense and really making sure, like I said, more of what you've accumulated goes to your family, your loved ones.
Interesting. Hmm. All right.
So the next one is really what you were talking about earlier about who gets what, how do they get it, when do they get it, providing protections where needed. And that has to do with customizing the distributions for our beneficiaries. And this is really where I think trusts have their real power to do some amazing things. You can avoid probate without a trust. With beneficiary designations, you can't customize your distributions to your beneficiaries except with a trust. So, so when we're talking about, who and how, then that's where the real power of trust comes in. But different beneficiaries have different needs. A lot of times people will tell us, I'm comfortable giving the assets outright to my kids. Great. Then that's how we'll set it up. But
Hmm.
sometimes the assets need to be protected, either for those beneficiaries or from those beneficiaries. Um, and so we've got some here on the screen. If they're minors, they're not legally able to manage their own assets yet. And if they would receive an inheritance, then again, it's going to go into a guardianship through probate court, having the assets managed for them. The trust can do that privately for them until they get to an appropriate age. Or if you have someone who's not capable of managing their own assets, they have a disability, or maybe they have, um, they're disabled and receiving some kind of needs-based government benefits. A trust can be customized to have someone manage those assets for them and maybe protect the assets to preserve their benefits that they're receiving. If you have beneficiaries who have creditor issues or spending issues, we can again shelter the assets from the beneficiary and protect them. Sometimes, we have those people where mom and dad are comfortable giving the assets to the kids, but they're not really comfortable giving the assets where their child's spouse would have access to it,
Hmm.
or their spouse's creditors. They're concerned about, maybe this marriage isn't entirely stable, and what if they got divorced? Would half of what we're leaving to our kids be taken in a divorce? And without the protections associated, in a customized trust like that, yes, they could be. So, so we look at what can we do to protect our beneficiaries who need it, and
Interesting.
that's really, like I say, where trusts have uh, real power.
And just the trust can be changed over time, correct? From what I understand. So if these protections are needed now and not later, the trust can be adapted, or if they're not needed now and are later. In other words, you can change this, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, these are what we're talking about, are revocable trusts,
Hmm.
which means they're amendable anytime during your lifetime. So, and we do suggest that people review these periodically to determine, is what we have still the right way to do it? Do we need to make adjustments in who our trustees are, who our agents are under our powers of attorney, who our beneficiaries are, how the assets are to be distributed to them? So it's a living document that needs to change as goals change, circumstances change, as laws change, and the revocable trust allows you to do that.
Okay. Nice. All right. So I guess one of the things that comes to mind is you mentioned that things can be done without a trust, and now you've given a lot of thought as to why a trust is beneficial. But what does the process look like? In other words, if somebody says, "Okay, I might be interested in at least exploring this," how does that work? Do they come to see you? How do you charge for your services? What does that process look like? I think that'd be helpful to know as well.
Okay. Um, Before I answer that, I wanted to clarify, because as I said it, I said, well, that's a little bit confusing. When I said you can avoid probate without a trust, is
Okay.
that what you were talking about?
Well, oftentimes we'll hear people say, "Well, I can just do transfer on death or beneficiaries, I'm good." And that could be true. So not everybody needs a trust, I guess. Not
Right.
everybody needs all the protections and the optionality that a trust would provide. So if that's true, then what does that evaluation process look like when somebody comes to see you?
Got it. Yes. Right. So what we do is, I mean, we will sit down and talk to people about their current situation. Who are their beneficiaries? How old are they? Do you have any financial concerns for them? Do they have any disabilities? Um, any issues with their spouses or their
Sure.
kids? And this is one of the things to think about is you and the universal you probably want to leave your assets to your kids, but we have to talk about what happens if one of your children doesn't survive you. Where does their share go? And often, usually, people will say, well, if my child passes away, I want her share or his share to go to her children. And maybe her children, I have adult daughters, and they have minor children. So I don't have a need to protect my daughters because they're minors, but I might have a need to protect my grandchildren because they're minors. So we look at that as a possibility and factor that into the whole analysis. But kind of getting back to your question, we do that analysis. We have to sit down and look at current situation. We look at assets and, what do you have? You have a house and a retirement account, an investment account, vehicles, what's the makeup of them? Not so much necessarily the total value, although that has to factor into it. But a lot of times we're looking at what kind of assets do you have? And then we look at what do you want to do with those? If you have one child and you want to leave everything to the one child, it's a very different story than if you have four children or
Or
six
six children.
children and you want to leave it to them. And maybe you want to leave it equally among them, and maybe you want to leave it unequally among them. Maybe you're a blended family, and so husband and wife, he has two kids, she has two kids, we have our own assets. What are we going to do? So it's all a process of kind of talking through those questions, identifying those issues, looking at goals, and then coming up with a prescription for here's the solution to most uh, fit your needs to check all the boxes that you're concerned about.
Makes sense. Yeah, again, we've gone through this process with you personally, and it is really eye-opening. Again, I'm in the financial planning business, and yet you ask questions and your process kind of brings things to light that we hadn't thought about. And then when you apply like the laws and it's a really fascinating process. And some people are afraid of it, and I understand that. I hope they're not. You're a person that makes it not scary. But it's so critically important because if somebody works their whole life to save for retirement, they've got a nest egg, they've got income sources, they've got assets, take that next step. Just go have a conversation and find out what is that prescription as you described it. What would that look like? You'll define what it costs, and then they can make a decision at that point. If it's important, then
Right.
they'll act. But you've worked with a lot of our clients over the years, and it's just been a big, it always gives me a great sense of relief when they come back to see us for a review and they say, hey, we went ahead and got our estate plan squared away. And I think that's such a valuable step for them to take. So I'm glad we had the chance to have this conversation. Is there anything you want to cover that we haven't before we wrap up?
Um, yeah, I guess, to kind of take the next step, I I want to share my last slide here if I
Okay,
can,
sure.
because we have on here we've got a lot of resources really on our website to help people get more information. Probably the one way that they could go is we have an estate planning checklist on our website. It's available for a free download. We've got the link there on the slide, and it's like a 13-point checklist. You need to look at this. You need to look at this. Make sure you're covering this. and it helps you identify issues. And of course, people can always schedule a consultation with me to talk about their situation, and go through that process that we were talking about. And often the hardest part is deciding to start. And people, when they finish that process with us, they say, "Wow, that was a lot easier than we thought. You made that pretty easy." And we try to do that because it it it's hard enough for people to get going. We don't want to
Mhm.
throw up so many roadblocks and make it so complicated that they can't make the decisions that they need to get this important stuff done.
Excellent. And for the people that we work with, it's easy to find you. Just come to our office and go left instead. So
Right.
we try to make
Right.
it as convenient as possible. But Richard, I want to thank you. This is always helpful. Hopefully, we can bring those barriers down and make this a less scary process than we might think it is. But again, I always appreciate your openness to share, and I hope people take advantage of this. But obviously, they know where to find me, and now they know where to find you. So thank you.
Right. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Me as well. All right. Take care, Richard.
Thank you. Bye bye.